Good morning. My name is Quisha Mallette. I am a staff attorney with the North Carolina Justice Center, and I am excited to welcome all of you to the third annual Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice. Um, the Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice is made up of a broad coalition of North Carolinians who are calling for justice, fairness, and second chances for people incarcerated in our state prisons, particularly Black people and other people of color. The campaign, as I mentioned, is in its third year, and it is partially focused on a small, regularly rotating group of people and organizations who will be standing vigil at the governor's mansion, since our primary demand is that Governor Roy Cooper exercise his clemency power. As we begin today's community conversation, people are gathering for vigil at the governor's mansion and to begin the relay for release and decarceration with the goal of 3,000 laps walked over the course of this month, and that is one lap for approximately every 10 people incarcerated in the state. As a part of this year's vigil, we are hosting a series of community conversations featuring North Carolina-based advocates who are fighting for freedom and racial justice in our state and educating their community on the ongoing harms of our modern-day carceral system. Today's community conversation is focused on the legacy of racism in our modern carceral system. This system of incarceration is built upon a legacy of enslavement of Black people living in the United States and has included many horrors, not limited to unpaid manual labor, separation of parents and children, attacks on bodily autonomy, and policies of punishment and degradation. Early policies leading to mass incarceration were a direct response to the freeing of enslaved people and backlash to the Reconstruction era, which saw incredible gains for Black people, such as political leadership and the development of autonomous communities. As many on the call today know, in 1868, enslaved people held in Southern Confederate states were formally declared free following Abraham Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. What you may not know is that North Carolina, along with the other Confederate states, was required under federal law to redraft its constitution so that state laws conform with federal laws. It was in that 1868 Constitution that North Carolina established new policies for punishment and its first state penal institutions. One such institution was purchased, rented by the state of North Carolina in 1891. It is Caledonia Plantation in Halifax County in the northeastern part of the state. It became the largest prison farm in North Carolina. And Caledonia had previously been a plantation for nearly 200 years prior, and following emancipation transitioned into a farm where many of those enslaved families became sharecroppers, working the land for nominal pay. These intentional federal and state policies and practices, among others, created a pathway for today's policing and mass incarceration of Black and Brown communities, the death penalty, profitable forced labor in prisons, and the separation of families through state-designed systems. These modern structures carry with them the symbolic residue of the Confederate South, including flags and monuments to Confederate leadership and white supremacy. During this session, you will hear from our speakers, James Williams, Alfred, Rivera, and Noel Nickle, and engage in conversation about how we can address some of these ongoing harms and injustices. Now I will introduce you to our speakers. James Williams was Chief Public Defender for Orange and Chatham counties from 1990 to 2017. Since 2018, Mr. Williams has served in an of-council capacity at the Center for Death Penalty Litigation as Racial Equity Coordinator. Mr. Williams has received numerous awards, most recently winning the North Carolina Advocates for Justice Annie Brown Kennedy Award for commitment to acquiring full freedom for all citizens of North Carolina and exceptional advocacy that protects individual liberties. Alfred Rivera was born in Brooklyn, New York, but has deep roots in Puerto Rico. Mr. Rivera spent more than 2 decades of his life incarcerated, including 2 years on North Carolina's death row for a crime he did not commit. He now works as the lived experience coordinator with North Carolina Coalition for Alternatives to the Death Penalty and is starting a food truck business. Noel Nickle has a long history of community organizing in opposition to the death penalty, including her leadership in a successful community effort for the Asheville City Council to adopt a resolution supporting a moratorium on the death penalty. Noel Nickle is currently the director of the North Carolina Coalition for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, a grassroots statewide nonprofit committed to ending the death penalty and creating a new vision of justice in North Carolina. You can learn more about Noel and the NCCADP on their website. So I will now turn it over to James Williams and Alfred Rivera to talk a little bit about Confederate monuments at courthouses in North Carolina and the death penalty. James Williams.
Thank you. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. I actually chair the North Carolina Commission on Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the Criminal Justice System. And several years ago, we launched a campaign to remove Confederate monuments, or to have Confederate monuments removed, particularly from court spaces in the state of North Carolina. And it should be self-evident why we did that, but I will address that briefly. North Carolina has over probably 150 or more Confederate monuments in public spaces. And currently about 45 of those are centered in courtyards across the state of North Carolina. And when I say across the state, I really mean from the mountains to the coast. So no region has claim, uniquely for those monuments. And those monuments historically were erected about the same time as the rollout or the construction of Jim Crow, or America's apartheid. But the roots go back even deeper, before that. I mean, after this whole thing really is about this narrative of racial difference that even preceded the formal formation of slavery. And I'm thinking back here to, and I forget the gentleman's name, there were 3 people who escaped from indentured servitude in the state of Virginia in the mid 1600s, I believe. And 2 of those were white, 1 was black. The 2, when they were captured, they were recaptured. The 2 white indentured servants, their punishment was an additional term of 2 or 3 years, to their indenture. For the sole black person, African person, who had escaped, his punishment was servitude for life. And so even before the formation of the country, before the formal laws related to slavery in this country, there was this narrative of racial difference that was being developed and implemented, and that carried forth through the period of slavery, through the Civil War, post-Reconstruction, and then of course, through the Jim Crow era. And I would submit that we are still encountering repercussions of that narrative even today. And so basically, these Confederate monuments, most of them were erected around the late 1890s up through 1920, 1930. And as I mentioned, this coincided and was part and parcel of the effort to implement this Jim Crow apparatus, which I think is an understatement, and that's why I often refer to it as America's apartheid, because it was another means of control and oppression and suppression of Black people in every sphere of life. And so when these monuments were erected in various public spaces, a number of them were centered in courtyards. And there was a reason for that, because there was this intent to convey this clear message that Black people, you better stay in line. If you don't, we will come for you. These monuments were obviously celebrating the Confederacy and those who fought for the Confederacy, and this notion that Black people were less than, different than, and were properly subjected to this type of oppression. The other thing that I'll mention is that, I think most people think that it was sort of ordinary people, or the less fortunate, or the poor and the downtrodden, the white riffraff, some might say, who led this effort to erect these monuments, but it was not. It was the primary profession, and based upon the research that's been done, is that it was the legal profession. And by the legal profession, I mean lawyers, but not just lawyers. I mean judges, and I mean judges at the highest level. State Supreme Court justices were very much involved in this effort to create these monuments to white supremacy. And so that started, I think, this notion, this sense that Black people were not entitled to the same type of justice. Even before that, of course, you had decisions by Thomas Ruffin in a case involving enslavement that basically said Black people, enslaved people did not have any right to recourse, and enslaver could do anything. There was no limit, basically, on what type of punishment an enslaver could impose upon his, quote, property. And so that is the tradition that preceded the erection of these monuments during this Jim Crow era. And so I think that leads us to what we see in terms of punishment, in terms of the death penalty being used primarily for African Americans. And it leads to this notion that Black people were not entitled and are excluded from juries, which further allowed this disparate punishment of Black people. And so I think those are some of the reasons why it is important that these Confederate monuments, these monuments to white supremacy, be removed from court spaces, because it sends the wrong message. The message that it sends is clearly that Black lives don't matter, that Black people are not entitled to not only justice, but to be treated with dignity when they go into these spaces seeking justice. So there's more I could add, but I'll just leave it there for introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. And now I'll turn it over to Alfred Rivera, if you could speak more on your experience.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's racism. As far as my experience is concerned, I've seen racism throughout my ordeal, even in the courtroom, for instance, down to the arrest, just being able to be arrested and deemed unworthy, in a sense that because I always thought about the fact that how can a innocent person even be arrested and then get convicted and sent through the system or placed on death row. And the only thing I could ever come up with is I had to start and understand that racism played a part, not just then, but historically. So it was passed down and allowed a person like me, a black or brown individual in America, and to just be snatched up and and deemed as or someone that is not worthy of the same as white Americans when you're in the court in the courtroom, and and just touching on what James was talking about as far as a developed racism, it's to me, I seen in the courtrooms where there's a racist atmosphere, meaning that the jury, the way the jury is picked, the certain remarks that are made in the courtroom, it plays a whole part of the history that's been passed down to nowadays. It's been over 2 decades since my ordeal, but the same occurrences are still going on. So it's just a continuous thing. So the legacy of racism is felt by many black and brown people that are brought into the system. The system is saturated with it because you have a society that has a legacy of racism, and so now you have a mindset of racism in the society, and that mindset is also brought into all of the different areas of our society, in our workplaces, in our courtrooms, and things of this nature. So you have a whole mindset that is actually operating, and because of its continuation, this is why we continue to see racism. This is how a person can be innocent and be dragged into a courtroom. A person can be sentenced to death. A person can be given a life sentence based on draconian laws or outdated laws or laws and legislation that are still going on since the Jim Crow times and things of this nature. So it's felt by and the fact that the proof and the evidence shows that throughout America, just the incarceration rate of black and brown Americans, that in itself shows that there's a form of racism. Is very subtle, and it's very and the aim of it is not to not reveal itself, but the fact is that it does reveal itself. It's just that are we in society going to acknowledge it? This is the thing. So the acknowledgement of it is really the point, with the starting point. So I might want to say, because it's been going on for so long. I mean, how many individuals, even here amongst us, can point out an instance that racism affected some aspect of their life, or their, everybody can bring something to the table about that. So it's very apparent, and for a person coming out of the environment that I come from, or where I was born and raised at, in those environments, we see it every day. It becomes like we become numb at times to it. I mean, at times I blame, myself. I blame the lifestyle that I lived because I was a petty criminal, because I was a person that, didn't have good direction. I didn't have a good education and these things of this nature. Even after being exonerated, and being wrongly convicted, I still had, and this is racism. Racism causes these type of mindsets to believe that everyone's against you, or you don't have a chance, or the chips are stacked against you, and it's because of the system overall, our legal system, our society, even our places of worship, where it touches every aspect of our society, and there's no way that that any individual, whether you're white or black brown, whatever. You come across forms of racism and everything. So and so what makes it so detrimental when you're dealing with a legal system that is so saturated with racism, and then an individual like myself can be sent to death row or can be given a life sentence just based on the mechanism or of racism that's involved in the system. It has nothing to do with truth or things of this nature at most of the time that when we go through these courtrooms. It's we know that district attorneys lie. We know that police officers lie. We witnesses are made to lie. Threats are made to get people to lie. All this is from racism. All this is from the legacy of racism. All this has been passed down. This is and the impact is still here. We can go back to a lot of older folks can point back to the 50s and 60s, civil rights and things of this nature here, and what they were going through, and it's still going on 40, 50 years later. So the impact, every day, someone right now, as we speak, someone is suffering from racism in the courtroom right now. So, my experience, I can go on and on from my experience as far as how racism affected me personally and caused me to be sentenced to death. It's something that's very, very penetrating, racism. Just like the prisons, we was talking about Caledonia prison. We talking about a farm that was created for the purpose of incarcerating black people at a time when slavery was supposed to have been abolished, but then you come up with another system to send black bodies to prison, right? And you make laws to sustain that, and that legacy is still going on. So, just to finish up on that topic, I think that racism is penetrating our system in such a way that it has to be brought to the forefront of the fact that that the mindsets of the mindset has to, the mindset of racism has to be eradicated in the sense of it has to be acknowledged and then spoken about in a way that it can be addressed and things can change. Because
thank you so much for that point, actually, because that I think creates a good segue for us to open up the discussion, and we would love to return to you all to talk a little bit more about what we can do to impact change. But I wanted to open discussion up to the broader group. If folks, if you want to either put in the chat or if you want to come off mute and in about a minute, where else do we see the legacy of racism in our state's carceral system? So you all have heard a lot about the history. I think James Williams took us to the era before there was legalized, formalized system of slavery. I think Alfred Rivera talked a lot about how we're seeing the same of what we're seeing so much of what we saw 40, 50 years ago during Jim Crow era that's still reflected today. What are you all seeing? What else do you think we need to bring into this conversation around the legacy of racism in our state's carceral system?
Are you asking us or the audience?
The full group, anyone, and if you have thoughts that you want to share, please feel free to add those as well.
Okay. I'll just jump in and try to be brief. There's so many areas, all right? I mean, when you look at the Racial Justice Act, that a primary aspect of that was the lack of inclusive juries. Basically all white juries, or juries from which Black people had been improperly excused, litigating and giving sentences of death to Black people, especially in cases where there was a white victim. And that is a relic, that is a legacy of this whole era of racial difference, of Jim Crow. I'm thinking about a lawyer, a courageous, and we can talk about some resistance here too, courageous Black lawyer in Mecklenburg County in the late 1890s, who was trying a case before a jury in Mecklenburg County. It was an all-white jury, and he was challenging that. And he was doing it in a very courageous, in a very strident fashion. And he basically said at some point, Black people are not going to continue standing for this. And the white prosecutor and the judge were sort of, irate and basically warned him that he better calm down, or he might be subjected to some things that, that he did not want to happen to him. But long story short is, the attorney lost that case. His client was convicted. He appealed it to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and I don't know exactly what the legal, what the legal issues were, other than it was related to Black people not being on the jury, but he prevailed. And so this is an issue that we've been dealing with, for more than a century, and it's still an issue today. You look at the war on drugs and its impact on Black people, which is also a legacy of race and racism and racial difference as it relates to our criminal legal system and so-called, our effort to achieve justice. But one could go on and on. You can look at, excessive force and police killings of Black people and not being held accountable. I mean, there are hundreds of things we could talk about, but those are just a few examples.
We also have a note in the chat from Courtney Steinberg. In Cabarrus County, all our judges are white. There's no representation in the legal system.
So I'm assuming she's saying all the judges in Cabarrus are white. And I don't know a lot about Cabarrus County. I do know that there's a Confederate, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Confederate monument there, and hopefully there's an effort to try to remove that. But I think you've hit on an interesting point, because I think we have seen change in terms of the bench and bar in the state of North Carolina over the past century, over the past several decades, because so there are certainly more Black judges, there's certainly more Black lawyers, but quite often they are concentrated in certain areas, and then there are other wide swaths of the state where you have very few lawyers of color, and as whoever indicated in Cabarrus, no judges. And that's something that we, as those who believe in justice and equality, and we've got to work hard to organize and mobilize and try to change that, not just for the sake of having a Black person or a person of color, but someone with the right mindset that it also represents Black people and people of color in those positions.
So we're definitely hearing about the ways that there are people that play a role in the legal system, from attorneys to judges to folks who may have a place on the jury, being really important to consider. Alfred, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to mention something?
No, I just wanted to touch on what James Williams was saying, as far as not just having a black face, but they have the right mindset, and that goes for even white and black alike. And so I just wanted to make that point, because that was exactly what I was thinking when I was hearing him speak.
Noel, is there anything you'd like to add here? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm so glad that y'all paired these topics, the removal of Confederate monuments and the death penalty in North Carolina, together. And I think I just want to give a shout out to this amazing film, Racist Roots, which was produced by our partners at the Center for Death Penalty Litigation. I'm sure we can share out that link. It's available on YouTube. But James mentioned, for example, Thomas Ruffin. So his portrait, this is some of the history that you get from the film. His portrait hung in our state Supreme Court chambers, and were it not for the work of Sherry Beasley, it would still be there. But the film really draws this direct link from historic lynching and racial terror to today's modern day death penalty, and to folks, like Alfred, who have experienced wrongful conviction. And the fact that he's one of 12, he's one of 11 of 12 people of color who were wrongfully convicted in North Carolina. The film ends with a really powerful quote from Henderson Hill: "The death penalty is one more Confederate monument that must come down." So it's not just hyperbole or a catchphrase to say that these Confederate monuments and this iconography in our courts of law really hold power, and that power is based on systemic racism.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that and bringing making those intersections really clear for us. And if you look in the chat, you can see a link to that film as well, and the website. Is there anyone else who wants to add into this piece around where else we see the legacy of racism in the carceral system in our state?
Well, could I mention something that's very current? And this sort of ties the knot with the effort to remove Confederate monuments and racism and our criminal legal system. And I'm thinking about the situation in Enfield, North Carolina, and Mayor Mondale Robinson, and that town's the town voted to have the Confederate monument removed. The mayor actually acted upon that decision and removed the monument. And so, and also keep in mind that the town of Enfield is one of the poorer municipalities in the state. It is also roughly 65% Black. That Confederate monument was not located in a courtyard, but it was located in a public park. And so you've got Black kids, being exposed to this monument that basically says that they are unworthy. And that is the only other point of significance. That's the only public monument in the town. So the only public art or monument in that town is a Confederate monument. And so what's the reaction of the powers that be to Mayor Robinson taking that monument down? They called in the FBI for a criminal investigation of him, seeking to charge him when he has been the victim of a number of racist threats by people purporting to be members of the KKK or white supremacist groups. And so instead of swooping in to try to provide protection for this public official, it went the other direction. We're going to look at whether or not we should charge you for taking this monument down. And the other thing that I'll mention is one of the things that we are doing this work to try to have these monuments removed is it gives an opportunity to work with local groups across the state who are seeking and desire to see the monuments removed. And a number of those groups are interested in other, justice related issues. And so it provides the opportunity to bring other voices into this broader effort to reform our criminal legal system also.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And I also want to note in the chat from Peter Van Dorsten, there's been a huge increase in those detained pre-trial, and Black and brown people are overrepresented in that population. Thank you for bringing in that comment as well. I would like to pivot briefly. Again, if there are other things that are coming up for you all during our discussion, please feel free to utilize the chat and there'll be room for more community conversation. But I wanted to turn back to our speakers to ask you all, how can we support your campaigns to address the legacy of racism? I'll turn back first to you, James Williams. How can we support this effort around Confederate monuments at courthouses?
So one of the ways, and probably an easy way, that there's a resolution on our NCCRED's website to support the removal of Confederate monuments from court spaces. That is one way. Another way is if you live in a community or county or town or city where a monument, especially one located in public space, a courtyard space is located, then if there is an effort underway to try to remove that monument, then join those groups and support that effort. And there's so many ways that you can do that. So that is another way. The other way is by writing, maybe op-eds or positions to your local media. Those of you who may have connections with, or relationships with elected public officials or administrators, people who are gatekeepers in those areas, utilize that relationship to at least get the conversation going. I'm not saying you need to spearhead the effort. So those are some ways that come readily to mind.
Thank you for that. And I actually want to kind of unofficially poll the group here. So I'm wondering who here either grew up in North Carolina or has lived in North Carolina, and you know that there was at some point a Confederate monument outside of your courthouse. You can announce it in the chat, raise your hand, whatever makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so we're seeing a few folks who experience having a Confederate monument outside of the courthouse. And I guess for those of us who experienced it, is there anything that you that brought to mind for you seeing it? And do you know if it is still there now? If you want to share, if you care to share in the chat or otherwise. Okay, thank you. From Sitlali, yes, it is still there. Sitlali, could you share what county or where you were? Oof, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, what?
Yeah, so I am from Elements County, and I know big efforts to try to get it down, and now it's more guarded than before.
Oof, thank you for that. And I'm also seeing a note from Laura Holland too. One way the legacy of race shows up if the way a record is used as a reason or excuse to keep communities of color from resources that are essential to thrive. Yes, employment, education, the right to vote, housing, and benefits. Yes, thank you. And thank you for that, Sitlali. That's really important to know. Anyone else want to share about the experience with Confederate monuments?
I just wanted to, I want a clarifying question. You saying like police are guarding these monuments? Like we're paying our police to guard a statue because they have nothing better to do? Fascinating.
Well,
I just wanted to pop in. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. And the answer is yes, if there is concern within those communities that someone might damage Alamance County. I think in the lawsuit that was filed to remove the Confederate monument in Graham, I think they estimated that in the course of a calendar year, there were several $100,000, maybe close to $600,000 or $700,000 that were spent, extra monies to have, I think was primarily sheriff's deputies guarding the monument 24/7. I think ultimately they put up some steel barricade around it, or gate or fence. But there are a number of other places that have used and still use to some extent law enforcement to guard and protect those monuments. And it is not a wise use of state resources, and particularly, if you are a Black person and you know that your taxpayers' dollars are being spent to support and protect, a Confederate monument to, that basically is saying that it was right for your ancestors to be enslaved. But yeah, that's happening in various places across the state.
So I think we can see here the very real tension and the importance of being able to uplift and support these efforts. Courtney is kind of noting in the chat what's happening around Cabarrus County. There's also an effort to get it removed with the Cabarrus Justice Coalition. A shout out to Courtney and Jamin, who are part of the Cabarrus Justice Coalition and have been involved in our vigil efforts too. And Courtney saying our biggest roadblock is finding a place to remove it. Oh, thank you. Peter Van Dorsten is also sharing an article from The Economist magazine that depicts the impact of structural racism and the and most egregiously for the imprisonment of Black people here. And I think, Courtney, you are drawing attention to kind of some of the ways that these procedural things create barriers for action. So it's not so much a concern about whether they can remove this monument, but where would it be moved to? And those are certainly ways that can help slow down processes that can move us closer to justice and fairness. Yeah, Alfred, I want to turn it over to you, and also wanted to know more about how we can support the campaign that you all engaged in around the death penalty.
Yeah, thank you. As far as support, we can share information, we can invite, and we can continue to use our voices and our platforms. But I wanted to say, as far as I wanted to share something, actually. I wanted to share something. And the reason I want to share something because it's touching on the topics. And I want to share this from Mumia Abu Jamal. He was a person that was on death row in America. And so I want to just share this. And so during the Nixon administration, and he was speaking of 69 to 74, the nation embarked on a so-called law and order binge that continues to this day. It is the modern day trigger to the prison industrial complex. And one of Nixon's top aides, Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman, revealed the thinking behind the jargon when he wrote in his diary about discussions with his boss. And this is what he wrote. President Nixon emphasized that you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the Blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to. This is the racism that we're talking, the subtle racism that we're talking about, right? It says every major government so-called anti-crime initiative from the evisceration of ancient habeas corpus rights by the Clinton administration to the stark militarization of American police, flows from that tortured racist logic that Nixon whispered to his top aides. They have created a system that is racist to its core, while not appearing to be. So this is what the subtleness of racism that infects our whole system. So it actually infects our everyday being, our everyday living. Is something that has to be addressed. It has to be exposed in the way. So the question about how can we spread, more is to me is more of we have to be dead on emphatic about this is a problem, and to point the problem out, and it has to be shown that the system is designed the way it's designed. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much. And I don't know, Noel, if there's more you wanted to uplift around the campaign. And thank you for bringing Mumia back into the conversation as well.
Thanks, Quisha. Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge that many folks on this call are doing the work, and that's so important. At the North Carolina Coalition for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, we're not going to be siloed in our death penalty abolition work. We believe that we have to be well-rooted and well-grounded in broad criminal legal reform transformation, if you will. And so that's why we're so excited to be part of the Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice. It's beginning today. And we're thrilled that in 9 days, we will be marching in Raleigh from Central Prison to the gates of Cooper's mansion. And we will be demanding that Cooper commute death sentences before he leaves office in 2024. I hope that everyone on the call will be there with us. It's going to be a great event. We have two fabulous speakers, Daryl Atkinson and Henderson Hill. We're going to have spoken word, Alfred, and a group of other folks who have actually lost loved ones to homicide. We didn't hear that part of Alfred's story, but sadly his father was murdered when he was a child. So this campaign, this commutation campaign, is being launched by individuals who have lost loved ones to homicide, and they will be delivering a letter to Cooper demanding that he commute death sentences. You know, Quisha, you asked how many people had a Confederate monument in their hometown. A lot of people don't know that we still have the death penalty in North Carolina. We haven't had an execution in 16 years. And because of that, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for some people, not for a lot of people, certainly not for the 135 people on death row. But part of our problem right now, if you will, is to let people know that we still have the death penalty, that 2 people were sentenced to death last year, that 10 capital trials are scheduled for next year, that 140 people have pending capital trials across our state. So if everyone on this call will just talk to one other person about the reality of the death penalty in North Carolina, about the reality of the blatant, as Alfred said, call it what it is, the systemic racism of the system. We just have to be talking to each other about it and then demanding the change. Cooper is our target. We don't have a path right now with the General Assembly. We have an even less clear path with the state Supreme Court after this year's election. And so we are calling on Cooper to execute his authority to stop any possible executions of anyone on the row.
Thank you both so much for uplifting. I'm sorry, it looks like you had more. Go ahead, Noah.
Well, I was just going to say, I see lots of good links in the chat. Yeah, sign up. Let us know that you're coming. So the ACLU will have a sign made for you to carry for our march. And just so much gratitude to the partners. The Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice provides such a beautiful, empowering opportunity for people to come together across the state in ways that have been so significant to me personally and also to our organization. Really grateful for the work.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all so much for the work that you continue to do. Thank you, Noel, for reminding us of how present this is for us in our state. Is there anyone on the call that's already ready to go to the march, planning to be there? Please feel free to raise your hand or make some noise. Well, we hope that once you get a chance to look in the chat, okay, we have some of us. Once you get a chance to look things over, hopefully you'll be able to go or encourage someone else to attend in some way, kind of as Noel mentioned. I will be a march to the governor's mansion on December 10th. Could you just share a little more details about the time and that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. It's a one-time event for now. Although there is a vigil in front of Central Prison every Monday afternoon. The time has just changed, so I'm afraid I might say it wrong, but you can find information about that on our website as well. But this is an event on December 10th, which is a Saturday. We will begin at Central Prison at noon. We will walk about 2 miles to Governor Cooper's mansion, and there will be a rally that will begin there about 1:15. You can join us at either location if you don't want to walk, and the speakers and the music and the spoken word will be at 1:15. The address for that, I think, is 200 East Jones Street. It's where most of the vigil activity is happening, in front of Cooper's residence.
Wow, thank you so much for that. So I'm feeling excited and I'm feeling encouraged, because I know that even with so much of what we face, there are ways for us to continue to move the work forward, to make our state a better and safer place for us to live. It is now 11:55, and if there are folks who need to hop off, I wanted to give you room to do that, but also wanted to see if others have ideas about ways that we can address the legacy of racism in our state. If there is work that you are involved in, either locally or the state level, please uplift that or let us know ways that we can connect with the work that you are doing as well.
Quisha, I'd like to make people aware that, and this is not something that's coming up in the next week or two, but sometime in the early spring, hopefully in March, we will be hosting a symposium on the harms caused by Confederate monuments. And I think it's an important effort. Quite often we hear people say, and people who would prefer that the monument be removed, but are not willing to take steps to help do it, because they say they're not really hurting anybody. And we know that not to be true. And we want to help other people understand that that is not true. So we're going to do a probably a 3/4, if not a full day symposium on the harms caused by Confederate monuments. And I would encourage people to attend once we get that all worked out and get the word out about where and when and that sort of thing.
And can people visit the NC Cred website for more information once that's available? Or?
Right, yeah, it'll probably be at least a month before we really know when and where and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to, it's as I'm hearing that, I'm hearing a little bit of what Noel was mentioning earlier, is that although we may not have all grown up with this physical monument outside of our courthouse in our hometown, the fact that we still have the death penalty in our state means that we are all continuing to live with that as a Confederate monument across the state. And just wanted to reemphasize that. Any other thoughts here? What else is going on around the state? I know we have folks from Cabarrus Justice Coalition, people doing work in other places. Anything else that we should know about or that we can share with the rest of the group? Thank you, Tim. I wanted to uplift this note from Tim. You can follow us on social media to stay updated on the vigil through December and beyond. And Tim shared that link in the chat. And I think if there's nothing else, I will go ahead and close out. I'm really grateful for you all for joining us for this conversation. James, Alfred, Noel, it's really been really helpful to hear about your work and also the context that you offered around both the Confederate monuments at the courthouse and the death penalty in North Carolina. We know that the conversation is just beginning, so I hope that you all will tune in more closely to the work that they are doing and continue to stick with us with our upcoming community conversations. You can tune in next week for conversations on the profit motives of the prison industrial complex and also on efforts to end the war on drugs. All of our conversations will be the same link and the same time, Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. Throughout the month. And so you can find more information about that as well. And then we hope that since we are at the very beginning of the vigil, we have a full month for us to continue to uplift our efforts across the state, that you will consider joining us in the vigil, that you will consider showing up at the governor's mansion at some point during the month and contributing a lap or two for the Relay for Release, and also to sign our letter for this year to Governor Cooper, and we'll share that in the chat as well. So yeah, we're really excited to have you all. Thank you all for trying this new conversation format with us. And if there's nothing else, oh, sorry, and let me actually uplift this note. So also, thank you so much. Would you like to share a little bit more about okay, you just wrote the article. I don't know if you want to share more about that, but thank you so much for this article, so you all can read more about it there. And we hope to see you either online or at the governor's mansion very soon.